Hi folks, I'm Matt Easton of Schola Gladiatoria. I run a historical fencing class in London and also another one in Woking. I've been doing HEMA since 1997 and running my club since 2001. Prior to taking up historical fencing and studying historical fencing styles, firstly longsword and then later on Victorian sabre, I did do sport fencing. I did foil at school and I did sabre at university, and in fact I did some épée after I left university, so I have done the 3 sport fencing weapons. In the past I have made a few videos about sport fencing in which I've said some things which different people took in different ways. Lots of people went, yeah, I fully agree, both sport fencers and non-sport fencers, and that includes HEMA people, historical fencing people, people from other backgrounds, other martial arts, or indeed people with no martial arts background at all. Other people disagreed vehemently with what I said, and this is the nature of this sort of thing. Some people love sport fencing, some people hate it, some people just think that there are certain things that need to change. I personally have known a lot of people, including myself, who have backgrounds in sport fencing, some who've competed to top level, and in fact I'm friends with people who instruct in sport fencing and run sport fencing clubs. And I know that some of those people, despite loving sport fencing, think that there's certain things about the rules and the equipment which should be changed. Now, change and development and changes of rules in sport fencing has been something which has been incredibly kind of ingrained in the sport since about the Second World War. There have been a huge number of rule changes and equipment changes, and of course electronic scoring equipment came in. Now, for those of you who don't do sport fencing, very simply, foil and sabre work on the rule of priority. In a simple way, without going into too much depth, I mean, you could look up priority rule in fencing and there's a Wikipedia page on it, but in very simple terms, the person who attacks first has the right of way, and the defender has to either avoid or deal with that attack before they're allowed to return an attack or riposte. Épée is different from that. In épée, they simply score the first person to hit, and there's an electronic box that records the first impact, and so long as there's a 1/25th of a second difference between the first and the second hit, the person who hit first scores the point. Now, some people, when I've criticised sport fencing rules and equipment, have said, oh, well, you know, épée is a lot better because they just count the first hit. Now, one of the problems with that is I study historical fencing, that is historical fencing sources, so sources written about fencing in the time when people actually used swords in duels and in warfare. And indeed, I study the source material describing actual combat accounts, both duels and warfare. And I can tell you for a fact that lots of people who were stabbed or in any other way offended with a weapon did have time to return an attack to their offender. So very often someone would get run through with a sword and they would have the chance to hit the opponent back. That's why several historical fencing rule sets that existed in the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries had something known as the afterblow, whereby someone who was hit had a chance to hit back. Now, it's quite difficult to implement that in general in a sporting context. However, I'm going to suggest one change which could be made to épée fencing, which would instantly make it more realistic and more like fencing, and dare I say, would make it more enjoyable to watch. And this is very, very important. Recently we've just had the Olympics, and back in 2012 we had the London Olympics. And lots of criticism in the historical fencing community was focused on the fact that a lot of épée fencing, and we see it in foil and sabre as well, but in a slightly different mechanism because of the priority rule, lots of sport fencing looks like two people killing each other or hitting each other with their swords. Now, experienced sport fencers and coaches and judges and so on and refs will be able to tell the difference and say, oh, well, you know, that person did an excellent kind of a combination move that meant that they were able to lure their opponent's sword to a certain place and then hit them a split second before their opponent hit them back. However, in a real fight situation, and yes, I know modern sport fencing is a sport, but in a real fight situation, and that's actually what we've evolved to see when we see two people hitting each other with weapons, a common person in the street, a member of the public, all that they understand from what they view of that exchange is two people hitting each other with their swords. they can see that that's not what a real fight should look like, because if they were real swords, if they were sharp swords, they would be two dead people. A person with an épée hitting another person with an épée, where one person hits less than a 25th of a second before the other one, in reality, both those people are going to be run through by their sharp épées, which come from an épée de combat, incidentally, of the late 19th century, a French dueling sword. So quite simply, most common people, despite the fact they might not understand the rules of fencing or even understand anything at all about fencing or swords, look at that fight and see double hit. And funnily enough, that's what historical fencing people tend to see as well. We look at it and we go, that's a double hit. Both people would be dead. What's the use of that? That's not fencing. So what I would propose that people experiment with and see the results and see how it changes people's fencing is, in épée fencing, we count the person who hits first. Okay, that's fine. Let's leave it like that. Let's leave it simple. But instead of 1/25th of a second, let's ramp it up to 1 second. 1 entire second. Let's say that when I hit my opponent, that opponent has 1 second in which to hit me back. And if they do so, neither of us score a point on that exchange, because we're both essentially stabbed. So neither of us has won, because both of us are stabbed. If both of us are stabbed, it doesn't matter that I hit them slightly before they hit me. We're both stabbed. It's not good for either of us in a duel with real sharp swords. So let's just give this a try. Anybody out there who's able to do this with your equipment, with your scoring equipment for épée, simply go and change it to a 1 second. You could, if you want, do this manually. You could do it steam, that is without the equipment, and you could just judge it in the old school pre-World War, pre about 1930 style, without the electronic equipment, and go, okay, you've got 1 second after a person stabbed to stab the other person back. If that happens, if both people stab each other, no point is awarded. You can also experiment with a penalty and say, if you stab each other, then actually you both lose a point rather than there being no point. You can experiment with the rules in this way, and you just see how quickly the style of fencing changes. I guarantee you it will change straight away as soon as that épéiste realises that they've got to hit the opponent and protect themselves on the way out and not get stabbed in that second after they've offended their opponent. You will start to see people recovering to guard much more quickly. You will see less charging along the piece, like jousting, to try and hit the other person first. And you will see less colliding of two blades. Give it about a week of regular training, or several training sessions of that rule set, and you will see a difference. Before you judge what I'm saying, before you hurl abuse at me, sport fencing is a fantastic activity, and it is always what I recommend people do if they come to me and they go, Matt, I want to study historical sabre fighting with you, or whether it's rapier or small sword or something else, but I'm under the age of 16, what should I do? I say sport fencing. It is a great foundation for any style of fencing, and it teaches you great movement, distance, timing, all of these things. The fundamentals are the same. I have always argued the problem with modern sport fencing is mainly the rules, and to a lesser extent sometimes the equipment, but mainly the rules. So give this a try. Before you judge, before you argue, before you hate at me, just go. As for someone who's done sport fencing for years and then has done historical fencing for even more years, nearly 20 years now, give it a try. Give this 1 second rule a try. You can even do more. You can even do 2 seconds, and makes it even more difficult actually to do that. But just start with 1 second instead of 1/25th of a second, and think about penalties for when people stab each other, rather than just no point or both people getting a point, which we don't want. You don't want to award points for a double. That's crazy. But play with that rule set and play with that time difference and see what happens. Cheers, folks. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, follow us on Facebook. You can buy t-shirts through Spreadshirt, support us on Patreon, or follow us on Pinterest. Thank you.